Good evening. This is the Town of North Andover's Finance Committee meeting. It is Tuesday, January 26th. The meeting began at 7:02. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the North Andover Finance Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information in the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 99 or Verizon Channel 28 or online at northandovercam.org. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we're unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. It is now 7:03 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. I will take a roll call. Jennifer Luz.
Here.
Chris Allen.
Here.
Ed McMillan.
Here.
Regina Keene.
Here.
Donovan O'Connell.
Here.
Thomas Ringler.
Here.
Dustin Silk.
Here.
And Kevin will not be with us tonight. All right. May I also welcome those that are not on the Finance Committee that are in attendance tonight. We have Chairwoman Picard from the School Committee.
Here.
Nice to see you, Helen. Thank you. We have Superintendent Gilligan.
Thanks for having us. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. We have Assistant Superintendent Jim Mealy. We have Town Manager Melissa Rodriguez. And we also have Finance Director Lynn Savage. Okay. I now ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, I'm just now going to open up for public comment. Public comment for those of you that are watching can be emailed to sweinrich@northandoverma.gov. I'm going to now check my email at 7:05 and confirm that we did not receive any public comment. We did not. Okay, we'll continue to move on in the agenda. I want to start by thanking again the town manager and the finance director for being with us tonight. They've put together a financial review and kind of update of the town's finances as well as some other information. And it reviews kind of all of those bullet points mostly in one at different stages of the presentation. So I'm going to kind of use that as a framework. And then if there's any additional questions about those agenda items, we can ask those questions after the presentation.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I appreciate being here tonight. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, and what she's going to do is go over our quarter financials, and then I will hop in after that. If the presentation has been shared with all of you, it's the first link on the second page of the presentation. I'm not going to share it yet just so she can have the stage, but it's also linked to the Board of Selectmen, Select Board agenda from last night. So hands it over to Lynn.
Thank you, Melissa. And thank you, the Finance Committee, for having me come and present the financials. So this is a financial report for the second quarter of the year. Just to recap a few of the categories and reiterate that we are on target. We, as the town manager and myself had stated last year when we were putting the budget together and requesting it to be presented and voted as was, that we felt we would meet our goals, and we are headed in that direction. We are on target. So the property tax revenues are at 47.4%, which is in line with last year. Last year was at 49. It's slightly down 2% only because, as you may not know, we have recently converted to our tax billing system, which now is integrated with the general ledger system. We finally, after 3.5 years, were able to get that up and running. So we had to put a hold on posting any collections while that was happening, because you had to have a clean cutoff. So that will catch back up through January, and then of course February when the next billing is due, which is February 1st. So I see no issues in that area whatsoever. We are right on target, and there should be no shortfalls. Motor vehicle excise tax are collected at 15.4%, which is up slightly from last year. Last year it was at 14.7%. So again, we're right in line. I see no issues where we thought, people would neglect in paying the motor vehicle excise tax because of COVID. They weren't working. It doesn't seem to be happening that way. And collection should be the biggest part is in March and April, when we send out the big commitment in February, and then they're due in March. So no issues there. Meals tax collections are at 25% collected. We haven't received the second quarter meals tax from the state yet. It will be coming in. Just to make note, that budget line item, when we set the tax rate, the DOR required me to reduce that. So we reduced that line item and spread it out amongst other revenue line items within the budget, but it was originally budgeted at $602,000. It got reduced down to $482,000. So we will meet that, because that's just about $120,000 a quarter. So I don't foresee an issue with meeting that as well. Ambulance collections are at 58.15%, which compared to last year was only at 56. So that's even running slightly higher than last year. The building inspection fees are collected at 54.75%, which is up. Last year it was 44.9. So that's a good indication. Of course, people are home, they're pulling building permits, and a lot of work is getting done. So it's generating the fees on that respect. The only revenue line item that I foresee we are struggling in is interest income, which was anticipated. With the crisis that's going on, interest rates have gone down dramatically. We are fortunate to have a very good treasurer collector who has been working diligently to reinvest our funds. She moves money around monthly and getting, to capture the best interest rates that she can. We won't meet budget on that, but it won't be detrimental to our overall revenues, because we have other line items that are coming in higher. I expect that will probably come in maybe about 150 to 160,000 lower than what is projected and budgeted. So having said all of that, if I factor out the motor vehicle excise, which is the largest portion of the local receipts, we are collected at 54% on local receipts overall. So that's a good indicator that we are right on target halfway through the year. So with any other line items that there's no collections, they're collected during a specific time of the year, and I anticipate them coming in as planned. On the expense side, I see no issues. We're only at 46.8% spent at this point in the fiscal year. The good thing is snow is only at 34% as of the end of December. As you know, we haven't had a lot of storms, which is good. That is made up of $144,000 spent to date, with $200,000 which is encumbered. So I do not foresee us, hopefully, unless we have some major storms between now and the end of winter, that's running really good. We will probably spend the full $1 million, but hopefully we won't go into a deficit, which will be really great. Moving into the enterprise funds, water and sewer water revenue collections are at 55.5%, with the expenses at 37.4%. Sewer collections are at 45%, with expenditures at 36.5%. And that is basically normal operations for this type of funds. So I see no issues with this right at the present time. Stevens Estate is still struggling, as we know, which is it was anticipated with, the crisis and the restrictions that are put in place. Collections are at 17.3% compared to last year, which was 36.96%. That's a decrease of almost 20% or $104,000 for this time in the fiscal year. And with the continued restrictions, we really know we'll never meet budget. I mean, that is unfortunate, but it's a reality. We won't meet budget. And as you know, when we set the tax rate, we had to vote to cover any potential deficit with a transfer from the general fund to cover it. Worst case scenario would be 300,000. We hope that it won't get to that because we have also put in, some different, put some stops on spending and things like that. So, and Melissa will talk about it probably further on. But at this point, I'm monitoring it on a regular basis. Any new information that comes up, we'll share with the boards. So one other piece in the financial reports, I just wanted to highlight on the town's cash balances. Overall, the town has $87.8 million in the bank, okay, which is what is being invested in generating the interest income. And that's made up of $15 million in the general fund, $10 million in community preservation. Special revenue funds, all combined between school and town, is $3.5 million. We have $23 million in capital for the municipal side. Sewer and water is a combination of $11 million with their capital at $5.9 million. Stevens Estate only has $38,000 with capital fund of $167,000. Trust and agency funds are of 6.5, stabilizations 6.9 million, and finally the OPEB trust is 4.8 million, and that's the combination all adds up to about $87.8 million. So that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions or concerns that they want to talk about?
I'm going to ask you just a quick question, Lynn, going back to the meals tax. You said that you anticipated 100,000, but the state only allowed you to anticipate 482,000. Did I hear that correctly? It just sounded odd.
You did.
Okay.
So what happens is when we set the tax rate, it's all driven around the budget, of course, and how we generate the revenue to meet that budget. So when we originally built our budget, we didn't know COVID was going to happen. And our normal collections for meals tax would have been $602,000.
Okay.
But with COVID, and they know that the restaurants and things have slowed down.
Yeah, makes sense.
They projected it based on what I'd already collected year to date, which was 120,000, and then just did it based on 4 quarters at that level, and told me that we needed to reduce that. So I was able to increase other line items for revenues that I knew we were going to be generating a slightly enough revenue. So the bottom line is the same. It's just in different buckets. Yep.
Okay. Actually, I'm kind of surprised that the revenue is as good as it is. I mean, it's rather remarkable, actually.
Well, we had anticipated that. I mean, not that we have a crystal ball, right, Melissa, but we did realize that, looking into 2022 was going to be the year that we were going to probably get hit.
Yeah.
Not 21.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. That was good.
You're welcome.
Lynn, I would also have a question. So it's great that revenue is, and I know you mentioned this or you said this so many times. You don't really see a big risk yet. I would be still wondering if you see a few cracks in the quality of our revenue. I mean, do we have applications from businesses or households to delay tax payment? Do we have some cases, or is there none?
I haven't seen any issues yet. I mean, like I said, 3/4 of our taxes are collected through escrows anyway. So looking at the revenue collection so far, we haven't had any issues. I mean, Of course, as I stated, the interest income is an issue. We know that, but we'll be able to absorb that with other revenue surpluses. Motor vehicle excise is above where we were, which would be another indicator that people weren't paying. They are paying their taxes. So I'd have to answer that with, I don't see any issues right now.
No, good for us.
Yep.
I mean, you read in a paper that with rent moratorium, so they don't have to pay rent, and then of course the owner gets into a cash short situation, but none of that really impacts us in North Andover. Certainly not at a big scale.
Right, and not at this time, right? Not that we see. Yep.
Well, good.
Lynn, it's Regina. One quick question. When you were listing the sources of the 87 million in the bank, the third item, you said 3.5 million in, could you repeat where that money is? I didn't get what you said there.
Of course,
It was,
that's made up of all of the special revenue funds, which are like donation accounts, grants for the school and the town.
okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Lynn. Does anyone have any other further questions? So I would just ask as well, we're getting some comments that some people are coming in faint. So if you could just make sure that you speak up, or that, if you're wearing a microphone, that if you speak right into it, that would be greatly appreciated so everyone at home can hear us. Thank you. All right, Town Manager Rodriguez, would you like to?
I would, and I'd like to present my screen if that's okay with you, Sasha.
Please. Thank you.
Let's see. All right, are you seeing my screen yet?
Yes.
Okay. So the first page of this is what we just went over. So if people at home are interested in seeing our quarterly financials, they are right available on our website, and anyone is welcome to go ahead and take a look at them. The next page is just really an update of where we are in the process. So we gave budget guidance back in December to the departments and the school administration based on recommendations by the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee. So we met with the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee, and we talked a lot about these revenues at our financial forecasting tri-board meeting. So I won't get into them as much, but we discussed with the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee that, as we suspected and planned for, that fiscal year 22 is going to be tougher than fiscal year 21 was. Many of our revenue resources are down and projected to continue to be down. And obviously it's our local receipts that are the most affected. And that's what a lot of our conversation with the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee was about. So it's interesting to see it. Typically we see that revenue source, the local receipts, increase by about 3%. Instead, we're actually seeing a decrease of $500,000. And a lot of that is made up of the meals tax, like Lynn referred to, but there's other things that you probably wouldn't think of, like court fines, because the courts have been closed, parking fees, right, because people weren't really parking on our streets as much, and we weren't seeing as many parking tickets. We weren't seeing as much enforcement because people weren't commuting to work. Passports, we have had no passports because people aren't traveling. So it was really kind of some strange revenues that were affected. As part of that process, we entered into a really comprehensive new growth analysis. So the finance director and I meet with the town assessor, the planning director, and the building inspector to talk about what we see coming on in the next year into the levy, right? And so the typical new growth that you see, that $600,000 number that we always keep it at, that's what you really see in residential single family growth, right? So maybe a new subdivision, maybe somebody's doing their bathroom or kitchen over, putting on an addition, and that makes up the 600,000. Anything above that is something that's extraordinary, right? So we meet with them to talk about what those might be. And so we know that we have new projects coming online. For instance, this year we have Bake and Joy, right, which was a warehouse that we were able to incorporate into the values and increase the levy by. And that's where we get that new growth number from. So it's actually a very strategic process that allows us to get as close to the levy as possible. So for the fiscal year 22 budget, as you know, we are slated to only be able to increase by 2.3%. And wait a minute, that's less than Proposition 2.5, right? Because those local receipts are decreasing, a really unusual situation for us. We gave guidance to the school department to try to increase their budget by 2.5%, which would give them level service. We are asking town offices, and that includes public safety and DPW, to only increase by 1.5%, which is a reduced service budget for the town. And we are seeing fixed and shared costs, which the Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee will be reviewing next week, coming in at about 6%. And so those are things like insurances, retirement, even things like our property insurance that people don't really think about, unemployment, workers' comp, things that we've seen kind of flare more recently. So our town departments just submitted their budgets last week. We had our first internal budget hearings yesterday and tomorrow. And then our budget is due to the Board of Selectmen by February 8th. The next thing I wanted to update you on was the CARES Act. So that was the funding that we received from the federal government for COVID-related expenses. The CARES Act spending deadline was originally December 31st, caused quite the stir in the municipal world because they were working off of their fiscal year rather than the town's fiscal year, which was difficult for all of us. So we hustled to make sure that we were spending everything we were getting, and that everything we needed was purchased, mostly supplies, staffing up until that December 31st date. After December 31st, they extended the deadline. But it doesn't really matter to us because with that extension, there was no additional appropriations, and we have spent everything. So obviously the COVID-19 costs will continue, right? And even with the vaccine rolling out slowly, we anticipate that we're going to have costs in fiscal year 22 that are going to be COVID-19 related. We also anticipate there's going to be costs from December 31st until June 30th, and we think that will be around $1.5 million. So we contemplated this in the MOU, right? And we have a plan for how we'll fund that 1.5. We'll start with internal budget capacity, right? What maybe did we not spend? There might be some positions we didn't fill because of COVID, or maybe we didn't have as much overtime in one department. And so we'll look there first. And if that's the case, then those are internal transfers that either we can make through the finance director or by going to the Board of Selectmen. The second place we'll look is the finance reserve. If you remember correctly, that's a new account that we created last year. That you actually control. So we would come to you and say, we haven't come for anything yet. There's a $1.5 million budget. That's a reserve. And we need that to fund this expense, right? And so that's the second step. The third step would be going to our reserves. And that requires town meeting action. And so our reserves are free cash stabilization. And so you'd see an article on town meeting that would basically transfer the $1.5 million to the fiscal year 21 budget, the budget we're currently in. If we went from free cash, it would be a majority vote. If we went from stabilization, it would be a 2/3 vote, okay? We've also committed to COVID-19 funding for fiscal year 22, right? Because like I said, this isn't going away. And so that would be an additional appropriation from the funding source of free cash at town meeting. So that's a majority vote. It would be a separate article from the budget because it's a one-time revenue source. We are anticipating, working with the schools, that they're going to need as much as $2.6 million. This would be both for COVID necessities, PPE, additional teachers as needed, as well for bridging the education gap, right? And so as a parent, I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I certainly see that they've fallen behind over the last few months. And I think we all recognize that. And so the superintendent and I have had a lot of conversations about our commitment to helping students catch up. So with that money, the 2.6 million plus the 2.5 million that we talked about in the last budget, we're looking at about a 7.49% total increase over fiscal year 21 for the schools. We also anticipate we'll need about $100,000 for public health next year, right? Vaccine sites are going to continue. We did get information today that FEMA will be reimbursing us for the vaccine sites. But if you've ever worked on a FEMA reimbursement before, you know that takes about 2 years. So we will have to appropriate funding for those as well. And that is mostly public health nurses as well as 1 public health inspector. So we have 4 part-time nurses currently supplementing our employee of the year, Caroline Ibbotson, and 1 part-time public health inspector who is helping Steve Casey. And I want to talk a little bit about the funding source because you always hear me say we can't use free cash for the budget. And in this instance, it's a little bit different, right? We know that these are one-time costs. They're not recurring, right? We don't think we're going to have COVID costs in fiscal year hopefully not. So it's appropriate for us to use a one-time revenue source to pay for these costs. If you use free cash, right, a one-time revenue source to pay for something that's recurring, it creates a structural deficit in the budget. And I'm sure you've all heard me use this example before, but I think it's really helpful for people at home. If you use your credit card to buy your groceries every week, eventually you're going to reach your credit card limit, and you're not going to have any cash in your checking account to buy groceries either, because you've created a structural deficit in your home budget. If you use your savings account or your credit card to buy windows, you don't replace your windows again for 10, 20, 30 years. By then, you've paid that credit card off and you have a balance again to buy the windows, right? And so you can see why that one-time cost is okay to put on your credit card, but something you're going to buy every single week isn't. So I just want to use that as an example because I think municipal finance is complicated for all of us. And sometimes it's nice to look at it like it's coming out of your own pocketbook. Just don't tell my husband because I'm sure he would say I'm spending my credit card on all kinds of things that are not appropriate. It's fine. So the other thing I wanted to show you is just what those COVID expenses look like. So you can see we had $2.7 million. We have been putting some things in for FEMA reimbursement. They have been very persnickety and driving Lynn crazy with paperwork and not really reimbursing for everything. They've really kind of said up till the vaccine announcement today that they were only going to be giving us cash back for things that are public safety related, which was a little discouraging considering that we're in a state of emergency, but we did have this CARES Act funding to fall back on, and that's helped. So you can see that the town has spent about $718,000. The schools have spent about $2.8 million to date. We will have a deficit of $10,000 when we finish this process of the funding through December 31st, but we know that we're going to have more costs like we talked about before. So one thing I also wanted to talk about was free cash at town meeting, because I think we're going to be in a little bit of an unusual place where we're going to be spending our free cash. And I want to talk a little bit about that philosophy and where that's coming from. So we're assuming this is the worst case scenario. There's no capacity in the budget. The state budget has spent all of the $300,000 that we borrowed from the stabilization fund and promised to pay back. And we're at town meeting and these are our articles in front of us. So we know free cash certified back in the fall at $10,835,562, right? We've got 3 transfers we need to make to the fiscal year 21 budget, the budget we're currently in, right? Typically, you guys do that in a special town meeting. So the first one would be the Stevens estate, and that would be worst case scenario, $300,000. I don't think that's going to happen. We have furloughed 1 employee, unfortunately. We have another employee reduced to only 5 hours. The building is basically shuttered until the next scheduled event back in the spring. And the RFP is currently out, so fingers crossed. We've had about 6 to 8 people request that RFP. So things are moving along there. We have the school's COVID expenses, and the schools have said that they have about $750,000 that they're going to need from the January 1st to June 30th point, right? And they've got some grants that they're using to supplement that, which is great. And then the town is going to have expenses about $100,000, and that's entirely public health salaries. So then we have the fiscal year 22 transfers, right? So you're going to add these all together and do these in the regular town meeting. We're going to have a stabilization transfer of $140,000, and that's to get us to that point, that 5% of the general fund budget from the previous year. That's our municipal finance policy. We're also going to have a $350,000 capital stabilization transfer. That's more than we have to transfer. We only have to transfer about $40,000, but we want to transfer more because we have resources right now and we want to save them for facilities master plan 2, right? And we're trying to figure out how we get as much bang as we can within our levy. The next thing we have is the CIP, and that's $4 million. Now, in the past, you have used debt to fund the CIP. Last year we didn't. Last year we used free cash. This year we are advising again to use free cash for 2 reasons. 1, if we do not use free cash, if we do not use debt, we are freeing up about $600,000 in the general fund budget. And that money can be saved for our debt payment in fiscal year 23 to fund the first year of facilities master plan 2. Right? If you have debt falling off, your best practice is to keep using that for debt, because it's really hard to get it back. It's really easy to gobble it into the operating budget, but we know we have all of these school projects coming on and we want to have funding for them. So we're trying to be really strategic about how we pay for our small capital right now. We know we're going to have about $2.6 million in schools COVID expenses of fiscal year 22, right? We've heard that from Superintendent Gilligan. So we have that. And then we have $110,000 in the health department COVID, which means that our free cash balance after town meeting is about $2.4 million. But no reason to panic, right? Because we know that in this fiscal year, probably April, May, we're going to be getting our Amazon permit fee. It's a non-recurring cost. We can't use it to fund the fiscal year 22 budget, but it will replenish our free cash by about $5 million, bringing our free cash to a pretty reasonable number again. So I think this is a really prudent plan, but I also want to show you that we are spending free cash down this year due to the fact that we are in an economic crisis of the rest of the Commonwealth and the nation, the world, I guess, really. So the other thing I just wanted to mention was levy capacity. I've heard a lot of conversation about conservative forecasting and leaving money on the table. I just want to show you this worksheet. So this is something that we receive from the state when we do our tax classification. And they basically tell us what we left on the table that year. And so we left $123,000 in levy capacity. To put that into perspective, it's 1.1% of our budget. That's a very small number. It's probably one of the smallest levy capacity numbers I've seen in a long time. Kudos to us for being able to so accurately forecast our revenues, but there's no extra money that is being left on the table annually. And I think that's really important. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about our reserves, and then I'm going to get into capital. So I know there is a lot of reserves, and it's a fabulous thing because having these reserves and I know people maybe get tired of hearing me talk about the AAA bond rating and our financial stability, but without that AAA bond rating and our financial stability that's created by these reserves, we wouldn't have the bond rating that we have, and we wouldn't have the credit rate that we have, and we wouldn't have the interest rates that we're going to have when we're walking into a really huge debt projects over the next 7 years. And so, I know it can be frustrating for people to say, oh, we have all these reserves, but those reserves are going to be helping us so much in the future. So we do have a stabilization fund. That's like a rainy day fund, right? You save money for when you may need it. We have $5.1 million in there, has to be appropriated by town meeting, is a 2/3 vote, right? 2/3 vote to take it out, majority vote in. We have a capital stabilization fund, and that's a restricted account. It can only be used for capital. And that's what we're kind of starting to save money, right? So we've got $1 million there. We're talking about doing about a $400,000 transfer in. What I'm thinking is we use that to do a lot of that design for the schools moving forward, right? We know we're going to have these design costs that are going to go along with our projects. We don't want to bond small amounts like that. So this is going to be a huge help. We have a special education stabilization fund that was created just for special education. That's all it can be used for. We have our free cash, which we just talked about, and we know we're pending appropriation at town meeting to close to all of it. And then we have our OPEB trust at $4.5 million, which again is another restricted revenue account. And I'm just going to run quickly through the CIP. I know it's on the agenda. I'm not going to go through it again because you all heard it. I do want to clarify something, though. I had heard that some people thought I was bringing a fire station forward this year. That is absolutely not true. The fire station is part of Facilities Master Plan 2. It will be introduced with the rest of Facilities Master Plan 2. That schedule will be determined based on need, funding, and capacity within the levy. So, I'm not sure where that came from, but I just want to be clear that there is no large capital projects coming out of the town manager's office this year. So this is the CIP that we went over. And this is the funding source for that CIP. So we have $4 million in free cash, like we talked about $820,000 that comes from Chapter 90. And so that's for regional roadways. There's also a capital bond bill that is pending right now that could be very helpful for the town as well. And then we have CPC applications of about $200,000 pending. We've also got a lot of grants this year for sidewalks and various other things, but this is what we've got pending for next year. And that is what I have. I'm happy to answer any questions. I am going to stop sharing just so I can see you all.
Thank you very much, Town Manager Rodriguez. That was really helpful, at least for me. And so I would like to open it up to the committee to ask any questions. I did kind of in our agenda put that we would review the SIP and give, this is the opportunity to do so, I guess, because that was presented previously at the tri-board meeting, but historically we've had our own meeting to discuss that. So if you have any questions regarding the capital improvement plan for this year, please feel free to ask those questions now, as well as any questions regarding the rest of the presentation.
And I want to say that I really enjoyed the tri-board meeting, and I hope it's something that we do moving forward because I think it was really helpful.
I agree.
Hi, this is Jen Les. I have a question. It's not about the CIP, but one of the things I was curious to get your take on is, as the last fiscal year developed and as we were working on the budget this time last year and sort of, March, April, as COVID started hitting, it became apparent that there were grants and other funding sources available to deal with some of the COVID related expenses. Is that anticipated to happen this year as well? Will there be any funding? Is that built in? And then I guess a related question to that is, how does the budget right now in your thinking address the fact that there are these vaccines that are coming online, which will presumably, it's hard to imagine what things will be like, but hopefully they will feel better. And at some point in the next or upcoming fiscal year, we'll get back to things like normal meals taxes, hopefully, and kids back in school, things like that. Does this budget deal with either of those issues of anticipated additional funding that could come in from other sources and how things are expected to evolve?
Sure. So last Thursday was actually the Mass Municipal Association conference, and we had a class on this, which was the one I picked to attend. And I was the pain asking the questions when they said we were done. But I think that one of the things I asked about was, how do we forecast our meals tax for next year? Do you anticipate that meals tax may recover? And they actually said no. They think that it will be another whole year before we'll be able to bring meals tax back to a normal level. They said that they think that people are still going to be very apprehensive about eating out. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I do know that they basically gave us the guidance to fund it as we were seeing it this year, which makes sense to me. I do think that by funding these one-time appropriations for the COVID-19 expenses out of free cash, we are able to take them away from the rest of the budget, really kind of isolate them, which is a positive thing because it doesn't mean that we're building our COVID-19 response into our operating budget, which is not what I want because, I'm hoping we're not going to go to a new normal. I'd like to just go to normal at some point. The vaccine rollout is taking longer than I think any of us anticipated, right? And we continue to see that it's going to take longer than we thought. And we're kind of suffering through that and struggling with that right now. As far as additional funding, right now, no. The stimulus package that was passed by the federal government does not include any funding for municipalities, which is unfortunate. I talked to Representative Micucci about this morning, and I know that she and others are lobbying for the additional funding. I'm going to be shocked if we see anything else. I think that them doing the reimbursement for the vaccines is their version of additional funding, but the issue is that some communities have used the CARES Act funding to supplement revenues, right? And that was allowed way further on in the process. At first, that was not something that was contemplated under CARES Act. And then they said you could use it to supplement revenues. We had costs, right? We've been red for a very long time. We've had increased COVID costs that we just had to deal with. So at this point, we don't anticipate any extra funding. There has been talk about some funding for the schools, but that also has not been anything concrete and has really been all rumors at this point. And so we're operating under the assumption that we're going to be doing this on our own next year.
Thank you. Donovan, I think Donovan had
Okay.
Chris, sorry, he's hand raised, which I think is
Chris can
very
go.
effective.
Chris can go.
I wanted to follow up on the $100,000 for public health that, and so from what I'm understanding, and I just wanted to make it clear, that money is just pretty much barely going to cover the salaries for our additional nursing staff. So that's not going to cover anything any incurred costs for actually opening up a facility to facilitate vaccinations for the general public as we head into the spring. I mean, all of those things, just physically having a building. So we really are on our own. All right, that's a little bit overwhelming. That's a considerable expense because, I mean, I actually, on one of the websites, it does list, I think our field house is going to be used as a vaccination center. I mean,
So it's off right now, unfortunately. So I updated the board on this last night, and Sasha, if you'll give me a minute just to quickly explain where we are with vaccines. So we were under the assumption, as with everybody, that we were all going to be getting a big bucket of vaccine and get to start doing vaccinations. And we're ready to go. We've got our staff hired. We have volunteers. We have a site. We have our online signups ready. Unfortunately, we've been told we're only going to be getting 100 vaccines a week. So that's going to take us about 10 years. So we're starting to move people towards the Lawrence site. And if you look today, Lawrence has appointments available for next week. And also the mega site, which is the Danvers Middleton site. So the state is putting forward about 5 to 7 sites, Commonwealth wide, that they're calling mega sites that will be able to vaccinate between 3,000 and 5,000 people a day. Gillette's one of them. Fenway Park is another. Our local is the Danvers Middleton. That one doesn't actually open until February 3rd. But my assumption is that they are going to be giving all the vaccines to those people to get them there.
I just look at it as that is reaffirming that, yes, the year, looking forward, the year will be lean. There will be, because these are expenses that we have to cover. There is no, we have to cover these. So, and we're not anticipating any funds for those. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Donovan.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Melissa. I really appreciate it. I just have a couple questions around the free cash, if that's okay. Is there a best practices for what a town our size should normally carry for free cash?
I think we have a lot of free cash personally, but our free cash is actually a little bit unusual in nature. So we got our free cash number up recently due to 2 reasons that I think are strange. The first one basically is that we had some large permit fees, planning board permit fees, and other permit fees, because we've had kind of a sudden cluster of new growth, right? And so that's unusual. We don't usually see permit fees like that. Like the planning board fee for the Amazon project was hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not something you typically would see. And so, we don't plan for those revenues because we can't, and they flip forward to free cash. But we also had a really unusual situation with Columbia Gas. And so what happened was that, and Lynn can tell you even more about this because she was actually here, but we had departments like the police department, the fire department, that got a lot of reimbursement from Columbia Gas for things that they typically would have paid for, right? Staff, overtime, et cetera. And so the police department and fire department that fiscal year turned back a lot of money, right, that they typically never would have. And additionally, because of Columbia Gas, and then also because there was a gap where we had acting town managers, we didn't spend some money, right? And then so we were holding on projects. During Columbia Gas, we were in response mode, right? And so some things that were routine that we had appropriated funds for, it didn't happen. And so we had kind of a 2-year weird period where we generated more free cash than usual. We're going to do it again this year because of the Amazon project, right? And then I don't anticipate seeing something like that again. And I think our free cash number will probably sit around the $4 to $6 million number, which would be much more reasonable for a town of our size.
So that was my next question, because it looks like we have 10 million, if I remember the slides right, 10 million around this fiscal year. And then if town meeting votes to appropriate the funds that you were suggesting, that would bring us down to, I think, like 2, and then you're anticipating 5 more. So next year we'd be looking at approximately 7 million. And I was just curious if that was a number that you felt comfortable with, and it sounds like it's a number that you feel more than comfortable with.
Yes, it's very reasonable.
Okay. And then just one more thing, 2 more things. So on the SIP budget slide, you had the free cash at approximately 4 million, and I'm just curious how you got there. And we don't have to you and I could take it offline, I guess. I just, given my scratch pad math, it just didn't seem to add up to me. But I know you and Lynn to be much better at math than me. So
Lynn is much better than that. That's a great color. No, so we have it's about 5,067,000. Chapter 90 is 820, and the CPC applications are about 200, which is what took us to that for. But we can certainly touch base and make sure
Yeah,
that
no.
got it 100%
That sounds right. Now that you're saying it, it sounds right. I think when I looked at just the number, it wasn't making sense. But that's good. I appreciate it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it for me. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Regina, I think you had do you still have a comment? Or question?
Yes, thank you. I had a question on the page where you had the free cash transfers with the worst case scenario.
Okay.
Under the FY22 proposed transfers, you listed out various items: stabilization, 140,000, capital stabilization, 350, et cetera. Are those in line with our our policy stated? We have like percentages that we say is what we want to transfer each year into the different stabilization funds. Is that in line with those policy
The regular
statements?
stabilization. Yes, the regular stabilization transfer will bring us to the amount in the policy, which is about 5% of the general fund budget from the year before. So that's the amount we need to transfer to get to that number. About every year, it's usually about this amount. The capital stabilization account is actually more than required. And that's because we're trying to start to save money for the facilities master plan too. And we'd like to pay cash for some of that design work that needs to be done. And so we're asking to do a little bit more. It's about $300,000 more than required by our policies.
And what about the OPEB transfer? We usually do an OPEB trust transfer as well. Is that embedded in that stabilization? I forget if it's lumped under stabilization or.
Nope, that would be within our reserve transfers, which are not shown here, but are in.
Okay, yes, sorry.
Yeah, they're in a so they're not in my presentation, but I can certainly send you the page. But that's where you would see that they're in the regular reserve transfers.
Okay.
So
And
this year, Lynn's gonna pop in. Go ahead, Lynn.
I can comment. We have a standard 75,000 that's out of the operating budget that will transfer into OPEB. We haven't made any determination in full yet whether we will transfer a larger amount at this point.
Okay.
The restrictions this year and the revenues that aren't projected to be as much. So it's something that me and the town manager, I'm sure, will discuss before we finalize the budget.
Yes.
Okay. And then I had one more question on the projected additional COVID expenses. I understood you to say the health department, the 100K is totally understandable that we would have, additional staff to administer the vaccine. The 2.6 million for the schools, additional COVID expenses. Can we just get some understanding of like the various buckets that covers? Is it nurses? Is it technology to support, remote learning? Is it,
Are you asking specifically about the schools, Jim? And
Yeah.
Greg, you want to wait until your presentation for that?
We have a slide specific to that.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Then I'll get the answer then. Thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Regina. Any other questions regarding Melissa's presentation? Yep.
Just real quick. The finance reserve fund, will anything from 22 go back into that? How will that work? Will we be pulling?
There'll be a finance reserve account in fiscal year 22 as well. We are committed to keeping a finance reserve account in the budget moving forward. If you remember correctly, we used to keep a balance in the health insurance where we would go to for emergencies. Yeah.
Yep.
Our goal is not to have that gobbled up because we will never get it back, right? So our goal is to keep that in the budget. So we're still finalizing our budgets, making our cuts, but our goal is to keep that within the budget.
So do you anticipate that money would come from excess from health insurance? I mean, like, budgeting health insurance for a certain amount and it goes over. Is that where those funds would come from? Or
No,
just-
so our plan is to try to keep it, it's generated by the levy, and our plan is to try to keep it as whole as possible. So last year, when we created this budget, that's where it came from, right? It was excess health insurance that had been saved since when you joined the GIC, and we wanted to make sure it was the most transparent process possible. We're going to continue to appropriate to that account in the same way.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I believe Thomas might have a question.
Thomas.
Yeah, so first I want to comment on those numbers. You know, I think I'm the most senior on the finance committee, so I started 7 years ago. While the numbers started to turn already 7 years ago, you know, prior to that, I think there was really tough times in North Andover. But over the last 7 years, the numbers got better and better and better every year. And I think that's I think that came always together. First of all, we had always a very conservative planning. We could have spent a lot more over the last 7 years because we had the cash, but we didn't. So we were really conservative and built up these reserves, which I think is great. What I was always concerned in those 7 years is, are they things we're looking at and we can't see, and it really hit us 10 years from now? And I was always digging and digging. I never could find anything, and I'm still scared when I'm off the finance committee in 5 years. Somebody said, "Why the hell did these guys didn't see it in 2021, and now it hits us in 2026?" So I still didn't find it, but I'm still trying to look for it. I have two questions. The first one is probably easy. I compared the CIPs last year to this year. So you took out the facility master plan placeholder numbers out of this year's. Is this coming back in for the town meeting? Is this so?
Not for fiscal year, not for the May town meeting of this year. So basically the facilities master plan 2, we hired a consultant, we did our preliminary work. They came back with some recommendations. The school committee has now formed a subcommittee they're reviewing the recommendations. If you remember correctly, of the 5 or 6 buildings that are in facilities master plan 2, 4 of them are school buildings. So they have formed a subcommittee, and they're really making some policy and administrative decisions that are going to create what the buildings will look like so that we can finalize the facilities master plan 2. It is on hold until next town meeting. So at the May 2022 town meeting, you will see those projects begin. There is no placeholders for 2 reasons. One, we don't know what it's going to cost. We don't know what the buildings are going to cost. And my feeling is that once you put a number out there, people hold on to that number forever. And they'll say, in 2021, you said that the middle school was going to cost whatever, and now it's this, why, right? And so, well, we have kept in our mind, and well, we've really been very strategic in creating our budgets in order to create levy capacity, in order to create debt capacity, in order to create savings. We know that we're not going to see facilities master plan at this town meeting, but we're going to be ready to go at the next town meeting.
All right. And that leads actually to my second question, and that might be something where you know, we might wonder in 2026, why haven't we done it? Why haven't we done it in 2021? And the thing is, you know, I'm coming from the private industry, and the rule is raise money when you don't need it, because when you need it, nobody gives you money. So I'm wondering why we use all the cash now and do not, you know, fund all the CIP with debt, because I believe, but you know, I don't know exactly. Lynn, you can certainly tell us what would be the interest right now to raise money, and what is the capacity? Just in you know, if the overall situation flips, and we know how quickly that can go, that the credit market shuts down, interest rates go up, and that might be not so much the issue that the interest rate goes up, but that the market shuts down and nobody wants to lend you money. And if that just at the same time happens, and I think you mentioned that we're going to have some debt-heavy projects coming over the next 5 years. So my question is more like, should we just, accumulate as much cash as we can now, use the debt capacity we have today, the low rates, the market which is open, and raise money now in anticipation that in 4 or 5 years we probably need 15, 20, 25 million, or even more, depending on what the situation is. Not that we have a plan in 2 or 3 years, and then the credit market shuts down and we cannot execute on it. So that's just my observation.
Sure.
And I have no idea if that is happening, obviously.
No, we've had similar conversations about whether or not to use debt or to use our cash on hand. I think we're in a pretty unique situation this year because we know that our cash on hand is going to be replenished, right? It's not typical that we would have a $5 to $6 million permit fee come in. And so we know that that's going to be replenished. But we also, and the reason that we are strategically making this decision, the same as we did last year, is because we're trying to create as much debt capacity as possible within the levy, knowing that we have these big projects coming on. So you remember that if we decide to when we decide to go forward with these larger capital projects, right, we're going to need a debt exclusion. And a debt exclusion requires not only town meeting, but also an election, right? And in my experience, when you come forward and you're able to encompass some of that funding within the budget due to good planning and management, people are much more supportive of a debt exclusion override, right? So, I think that it could go either way, right? And we certainly had this conversation last year. I believe it was Selectwoman Smedili that brought it up, that the rates are low. But we really think that our best practice at this point is to continue to save that money. And so if you think about the debt capacity that we're freeing up this year, it's $600,000. That's about a $6 million project. And that's significant. So I'd rather save that debt capacity for those larger projects than these smaller things like pickup trucks and fire trucks, et cetera.
We'll find out in 5 years.
We will.
Because if you have the debt capacity, but the market shut down and nobody gives you money,
Yeah.
your debt capacity is then wasted, at least for a year or two.
Honestly, though, if that did happen, we would probably go back to around 2008 free cash numbers, which at one point was negative, and at another point was $15,000, $20,000. So we wouldn't have the availability of the free cash either. So I think that either way, if that is the case, if we do see everything crash around us, which is not really what I'm anticipating and not what we're hearing from the experts on our end, but I think we wouldn't be able to appropriate it through cash either at that point.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I will ask that we move on unless there's anything pressing, and allow Superintendent Gilligan and Assistant Superintendent Mealy to present their information to us tonight, which I think this flows right into it, and we're very grateful that you're here, as well as Chairwoman Picard. So thank you.
Thank you, Sasha. We really appreciate being here tonight, and it's great to have Dr. Mealy with me and Chair Picard. So you'll probably hear from all three of us tonight. We really appreciate it. So this is the North Andover School District's FY22 budget and 7-year plan, which would take us through 26-27. And we'll be talking about that tonight. So Dr. Mealy, could you go to the next slide if you may?
Do you want to talk about this being the superintendent's recommended budget?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that next with the key points, but this is the superintendent's recommended budget. The school committee just had a first read on January 14th. I think it's important to note that they'll hold a public hearing this Thursday night and have deliberations, and then also be back for a school committee meeting tentatively scheduled, or is scheduled, for February 4th to take a vote on that budget. So they still have a little bit ways to go in the school committee process. But at this time, for the public and those who don't know, the superintendent comes in every January with a recommended budget that they put forward to the school committee. And then the school committee takes input, they may make changes, and then they eventually vote. So,
And thank you for coming in at this point in the process. I think it was helpful for the finance committee to be able to see the recommendation, especially given the unique nature of this year and the following year and the funding sources and all that good stuff. So thank you. Thank you for coming in and presenting at this point. We really appreciate it.
well, to Thomas's point earlier, I was really thinking, like, when he was saying what could happen 10 years from now, I mean, none of us could have known we would have hit a pandemic this year. So I think it's a good thing we are where we are. But FY22 budget key points. I think it's important to point out that this year's budget is the recommended budget is a 2.5% increase, and that provides level services. And level services would allow us to keep the core of what we have this year and bring that forward next year. It's also consistent with the revenue projections impacts as we've been impacted by the pandemic. But I think it's also important to note that we have a high school scheduling initiative here. And based on signing the MOA last June with a couple positions, that we couldn't fill until the end of September, and those were classroom teachers, that money in the appropriation to put 5 teachers at North Andover High School to a schedule initiative that they're looking at having a new schedule for the fall. And that would add 5 teachers in world language, history, science, social studies, and mathematics. So I think that's important to say. Secondly, this you'll see in a little bit that we identify possible COVID-related expenses for FY22 that will be funded as one-time expenses. I think that many communities have said that they have needs that will be unbudgeted. I think it's really critical that we know that we will have needs, and that COVID-19, we have students, and we're planning on a full return for the fall, and that's our hope. But we know that we'll have students that will be coming back with potential gaps, loss of learning, that may have suffered trauma, that have social emotional learning issues. And we know that we'll need staffing, whether it's for interventionists or social workers for SEL, or if we're going to add teachers to reduce class size and tackle some of the challenges that way. We know that we'll have those one-time expenses as a result of the COVID pandemic. The third key point is that we have adjusted our 5-year plan to a 7-year plan. And I think that's really important because it takes into account where we are with the pandemic. And then secondly, important things I think we're doing at this time is lining up this operating budget with having it coincide with the facilities master plan too. I think it's really smart of Chair Picard and the school committee to have a subcommittee that will put recommendations forward so that we can have our needs drive the spaces we create to create the best places for teachers to teach and kids to learn, because we don't have the space to impact class size in a longer term plan because we've run out. I mean, the middle school is, at capacity. It's some of the highest class size in the Commonwealth. So I think that's really important. I think the other part that's nice about tying the operational plan and looking at the facilities master plan too is, I think Kittredge is 71 years old. NAMS is, opened in 54. Franklin's 63 years old and Atkinson's 57. But there's a lot of folks in the community, and Chris Allen, you'll get a kick out of this. They'll say, well, the new schools. And I was thinking to myself, well, the new schools aren't so new. Sargent's 25 years old and Thompson's 22 years old. And the high school is 17 years old. And, the Bradstreet is only 2.5. So I think it's important that we put all this together so that we can line this up in this plan, to best meet the needs of the kids. And then I think the next important thing is this, I've been here a long time in a variety of roles, and this annual percentage increase will not meet the needs of our students. I mean, I've seen us fight every year after year. We advocated for more last year and came out with a 5-year plan, and in the long run, it's marginally impacted our per pupil spending and some of the things we want to do. We have a ton to be proud of here in North Andover. And I could go on and on about all the accomplishments. But, in my opinion, I think as a community, we all have the same goal. We want an excellent education for all of our kids. And some people might want to get to that goal faster with a facilities master plan or an operational plan in light of COVID. But I think that the things that's most important is working to build consensus, to have a longer term plan, and to be able to put that forward with a commitment from all the stakeholders so that we can create these spaces for our kids. You know, I've watched it a long time. I think I'm the 8th superintendent since Harry was here in 2006. So maybe 15 years, 8 superintendents. We want to change, I want to change, and our team wants to change the trajectory of how we fund and what we do here in North Andover. The facilities master plan plays into it. And I also think funding our operational budgets over the next few years are critical to that. Those are some of the key points. Dr. Mealy, if you can go to the next slide. So the budget overview, we're going to talk a little bit about the strategic plan and the school committee budget directives, the FY22 recommended budget, the COVID-related budget, the 7-year plan, and operating budget impact. So if you go to the next slide, the strategic plan here in North Andover is really based on 3 main objectives. We're really proud of the strategic plan here. It's become a model for a lot of communities, but the 3 main objectives are focused on equity for all students, a consistent and rigorous curriculum across all levels, and targeted professional practice. Under each of those 3 main objectives, we have multiple initiatives with deliverables that are really key in helping us move forward in a plan over time. Next, we have the school committee budget directives, and I'd be more than happy if she wanted to, and I don't see her on the screen, I lost her. If Chair Picard would like to say anything about the school committee budget directives, I'd be happy to have her do so.
I am here, Dr. Gilligan, and I'm happy to say just a couple of things. There's a lot of words here, but I think it really boils down to looking at this budget through 3 lenses. Obviously, the lens of COVID needs to be how we're looking at everything that we're doing within the budget. We don't know if we're going to be, what the needs are going to be at this point. The second lens is the strategic plan, which Dr. Gilligan just talked about. And if you read a number of our bullet items are familiar year by year, that we're trying to address class size, that we're trying to address high needs populations. This year particularly, we're concerned and ongoingly concerned about the appropriate materials and professional development for our teachers, because no one has ever taught like this before. No one's ever taught like this in 2021. No one's ever had to recover from the things that we're experiencing now. So these professional development opportunities and the materials that we're going to need to be able to address this in the future are very important right now, even though that's a bullet item that's been on our budget directives for many years. And then the third lens is our 5-year budget plan that we put together last year, really with the encouragement of FinCom. We've been really appreciative of that opportunity to think that longer term. That's not really how the budget process is set up, legislatively, but it was a really wonderful opportunity for us to look at what our options and opportunities are going to be in the future. So those were our budget directives. Thank you.
Terrific. Dr. Mealy, could you speak to the FY22 program summary, budget program summary?
Yes, and so this is how we usually roll up the budget by these categories: district-wide, elementary, high school, middle school, maintenance, special education, technology, and transportation. And you can see the year-to-year amounts. And what we're reflecting here is the FY22 recommended budget and the percentage increase from this year to next year. And I just want to draw your attention to 3 things. One is a big reason that this year, traditionally, consistently, 3% is what level services cost us. Mostly, not surprisingly, it's our staff, our salary expenses. And usually so those steps and percentage increases to the salary schedules consistently come to a total of 3% for level services. The reason it's 2.5% this year is because when we were negotiating with our groups for the current contracts, we had stressed that we anticipated FY22 being a tough year, and they worked with us and negotiated the lowest percentage increases we've seen in years for FY22. So that's why level services traditionally at 3%, but this coming year, FY22, it's only 2.5%. So that's one. The second one is The maintenance number might surprise some people that that's going down, but that's mainly because we purchased vehicles this year out of the operating budget, but we will not need to do so next year. So that expense is not in there. And then the last one is the transportation line is larger than the others, and that's because they froze the contracted increases for us this year, and then they go into effect next year. So we see a higher than anticipated percentage increase for them, but it helped us this year. And so in total, we have 2.5% recommended budget increase. And then Regina was asking about the COVID-related expenses, and I shared during the presentation of the budget to the school committee that one thing I've prided myself on over the years is the ability to project, and this one is the task of trying to project next year what COVID might cost us without knowing, one, to what extent we're going to be in it or out of it, and what recovery services might require. It's daunting. So this is our best guess right now. If we have to continue OLA, we're not anticipating that we would have to do it for the whole year, and that's why it's about half of what it will cost us this year, and the same with the other staffing costs. We purchased a lot of things that we won't need to repurchase next year, like the devices. We might have to fill in for some lost or damaged devices, but not to the tune that we had to this year. Same with PPE, we have a lot in stock. And so what we really focused on is that bottom number of recovery services. And we set aside $1 million right now. And Dr. Gilligan will certainly be speaking to that in our next school committee meeting. And he might even talk about it. I think we have a slide about it in this presentation as well, of what we anticipate those recovery services could be. But right now, our best guess, and that's what it is $2.6 million for next year.
Great. Next slide.
There it is.
So we know, I mean, it's really clear, the national and the state research out there, that COVID has disproportionately impacted students on special education plans, lower socioeconomic groups, students, our EL students. And we also know it's impacted all of our students, some of our high achieving students, across all levels, it's impacted. And I've seen it firsthand, as a dad. It's certainly been a challenge, and it's been a challenge all over Massachusetts and everywhere during this pandemic. So, some of the guiding questions that we have around recovery services, I think, are really critical to think about. Because when we think about recovery services, there's a few key things. Number one is one of our top concerns is always reading and early literacy. You need to learn how to read and be literate. The research is really clear. If you can be on grade level by third grade, it's a big predictor of life success and all sorts of positive outcomes than if you're not. So we want to be able to make sure we can get kids caught up. But the guiding questions are: what will it take to reopen schools safely for all students every day? What COVID response and investments will we need to continue? What is some of the work that we may have done that was paused due to COVID? What do our students need to recover from the learning loss? What new issues do we need to be prepared to handle that were caused during the pandemic? And what resources are needed to produce equitable and excellent outcomes for all students, and particularly our highest needs students as well? Next slide, Jim. All right. So in terms of recovery services, the number one thing that we need to know is where kids are at. So, when I talk about standards, we're talking about what we want kids to know and be able to do. We have grade level standards across all of our grades, and student assessment is really key, particularly during this COVID time, of knowing where kids are academically and socially, emotionally. When we have student assessment data, it allows us then to respond. How are we going to respond? What are we going to do for kids who need to be caught up? What are we going to do for students who might get it right away and have maybe even excelled? And how are we going to do that? So the response really involves, and I know there can be a lot of educational jargon, so bear with me, I should probably have a glossary for some of these. But in terms of the response, is response to intervention. How are we going to meet those needs of kids who need intervention? How are we going to have differentiate for the, the wide variety of needs across particular classrooms? One of the biggest things and the most important things we can do is take care of kids' social emotional learning. It is critical, and we need to attend to those needs before they can attend to academic needs, and that's research has long showed that. So when we get data, we need to analyze the data, set goals, and really that will drive for recovery services the staffing, the programming in terms of regular programming, interventionist, special education, so that we can provide targeted instruction, then have ongoing progress monitoring. And what's also critical in all of this recovery services is to get back to our standard over the years is teacher collaboration and looking at student work along with professional development. And that will really drive, these things will really drive, and that data will really drive what kids need, because kids show up and we take them on as a class, and depending on where they are at point A, it's our job to figure out how to get them to point B. And there may be different kids who have, further to go or need more, and that plays all into it. So whether it's through programming and special education, whether it's through interventionists, whether it's through smaller class size to tackle these challenges, that's what the mid-year data coming up that will be, from our assessments will determine and really help with this planning moving forward. But we certainly know we'll be there. Long-term plan and school capacity projects and needs. So one of the main things in the long-term plan is something that we've really tackled. We've made good progress over the several years at elementary. The Brad Street allowed us to open up some classrooms and to be able to reduce class size at elementary. And over the time and over the period of this project, we're going to need teachers across all levels. We're going to need specialist teachers, and that includes fine arts. We're going to need special education and program teachers. The core academic subject areas: English, language arts, reading support, only library media specialists. We have some money in here for out of district tuition funding, administrative leadership support, special education leadership support, custodial support, and we also have in here a registrar parent liaison. And if you go to the budgets executive summary, the justifications of why those are all here and why they're critical are in there. As many know, we advocated last year for a 5-year plan. No one had ever come up with a 5-year plan in North Andover. We've kind of gone year to year. And, typically if we were at 3% with level services, I think, as Dr. Mealy said, it typically would see 3.65, 3.75, 3.5. So you'd have a couple $100,000, $250,000, $300,000 for new initiatives. And we really laid out what we think the long-term needs are for North Andover, with the understanding that we didn't know where some of the projects may come online, particularly at the middle school. So Dr. Mealy, if you want to jump in on this, that would be great.
So all the items, the identified needs that Dr. Gilligan was just talking about are reflected. This is a reminder of what the 5-year plan looked like last year, where we had in year 1 a half-time assistant principal, the registrar parent liaison, the 6th grade teacher, elementary teachers, and you can see going out the additions that we were trying to do each year. We only did a few of the items in year 1. We did the 6th grade teacher to complete that team, and we did special education teachers and special education programming. All the other items were held out, and then we're holding out this year, other than the high school teachers, which Dr. Gilligan will explain. But you can see in column 2, year 2, our new plan pushes these out to delay implementation. And again, for 2 reasons. 1, as we all know, dealing with the impact of the pandemic, and 2, to better coincide with the projects that will be coming online. And just as a reminder, that was a 4.5% increase over the 5 years in the 5-year plan, which, and it was somewhat, we got feedback from the school committee presentation that it was confusing to show all of the numbers in the 7-year plan that included what we got funds for, but we didn't do, and what we were moving. So I've tried to simplify it by just showing what the new plan looks like, and you can compare it to the 5-year plan and see how things have been pushed out, such as the assistant principals at the elementary level, such as the middle school teachers, and I've identified when we anticipate the projects could be coming online. You can see the column headers include Project 1, Project 2, 3, and 4. And the other items, the EL teachers, the social workers, the reading teachers, library media specialists, all getting pushed out so that year 2 only reflects the one initiative this year, this coming year, of the high school teachers, which again, Dr. Gilligan will be talking about. And the overall picture there is reflected in this slide. You can see the 2.5% recommended budget for this year, and then the percentage increases over the next 4 years of 4.56, 4.76, 4.09, 4.6, if we were funding these through the operating budget. And then year 7, when Project 4 comes online, we would be back in that kind of regular level services plus model that we've been working in. And so with these slides, the next few slides that Dr. Gilligan's going to speak to, is just a timeline of that 7-year plan. Dr. Gilligan?
Yeah, so I think Dr. Maley mentioned this was last year, some of the programming and staff we added last year, and we were creative, being able to add a nurse at Atkinson, for example, through a grant, those types of things. But last year, the special education programs, we completed a team of 3 teachers in the 6th grade to make it 4 to match up with the rest of the school, and added the EL staff. Next slide, Jim. For the upcoming year, based on signing the MOA with the money appropriated, and then the money we had spent as one-time expenses this year on COVID, which was significant in terms of, the online academy and, technology and the money that had to be spent to get us up and running here. But in year 2, which is this upcoming year, 21-22, the North Andover High School, we've put in 5 teachers, which is still at the 2.5%. And they need a schedule change. I mean, if you can look back to, I was looking back at some of the executive summaries from, I think it was FY15, FY16 from Jen Price, and we've been talking about this high school schedule change and NEASC visiting for a long time. And, we had put in 7 teachers. We now know, we believe it will work with 5 at this time, after working closely with Steve and Chet. So it's math, English, social studies, science, and world language. And also, at the same time, the school capacity subcommittee work is really critical to make a recommendation. I think one of the things that I talked about with Helen that I really appreciate her leadership on the school committee is, I've seen superintendents in other districts kind of make these decisions in isolation or more just with their team. I think it's really important, as we were talking earlier about the ages of our schools, to have a subcommittee, vet these, bring them to the school committee, and then bring them forward to the Facilities Master Plan 2 committee, so that 30, 40 years from now, someone's like, well, why did they put this here? Why is this here? We want to make the best decisions for our kids and tie it in here. Next slide, Jim.
Yeah, can I just add a little, to elaborate a little bit more on the work of that subcommittee? The intent is for it to gather data, do the research, and get community input, and develop the different options that are out there, and then provide the pros and cons of each option. So try to identify every possible option, pros and cons, and then present those to the school committee. And then the school committee would spend time getting public input, vetting the options, and making a recommendation, as Melissa had said earlier, to the May 22 town meeting.
Jim,
Sorry, just very, very briefly, could you just give 2 sentences on what is the schedule change? Like what are you doing?
So they're examining a schedule change, looking, I think folks know that, they've been on a trimester schedule for some time. So they're examining, the trimester schedule in and of itself, and how do we best serve kids. I think one of the things that NEASC had a couple recommendations that had come out in terms of taking a look at the deficits and benefits of the trimester schedule, and maybe looking at more of a traditional schedule. So there's work going on, a small committee now, taking a look at these different pieces. It's something that will also be collectively bargained with the union, and we anticipate bringing that to the school committee this spring, but we'll also be soliciting feedback from students, staff, and parents as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Great question. All right,
Can
so yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, and actually you may have this so I can hold my question, but are the teachers that are represented in your 7-year plan, do those also include their benefits costs?
The
Or is
OPED,
that different?
OPED is included in, yes.
Okay.
Yep. So as we go through and we take a look at the year 3, FY23, you'll see the positions listed there. You go to year 4, James, Dr. Mealy. Again, you'll see the Facilities Master Plan Project 1 come on and the anticipated positions we believe at that time. Some of these may be subject to change depending on what some of these options are. And, you know, that's really important. Those options will, the subcommittee and the Facilities Master Plan 2 will drive, you know, based on our needs, the spaces we create, and then those spaces we will need to fill with staff. And that's what kind of thinking about this longer term plan. You know, this represents our best thinking at this time, looking out to things that may change slightly. Then year 4, FY25. Year 5, excuse me, Jim, thank you. FY25, Facilities Master Plan 2 project coming online, and the staffing within the plan. And then the last year, Jim, is that year 6, Facilities Master Plan Project 3. As you know, I think in Facilities Master Plan, in our plan last year, the 5-year plan, I think you probably saw in year 5 the biggest chunk of change for teachers. I think it was probably $900,000 last year. You know, North Andover Middle School has the highest class average in the region, and we were looking to add teachers enough for you know, a team at each level in special education. So it was a big chunk, and you know, that will depend on what kind of project we create. And then year 7, Facilities Master Plan 4, and then a return to level services plus budgeting takes us through that. And Dr. Neely, if you go to the operating budget impact, Jim, if you could take that one, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, so Tasha, I'm glad you asked that, because if somebody looks at the 5-year plan and looks at the positions in the 7-year plan, they'll see a difference of $6,000 per position. So 60 becomes 66, and then 900,000 becomes 990. So that does reflect the anticipated amount for OPEB liability in the 7-year plan.
So I assume that if you say it's just I'm sorry, how much per employee?
It's 6,000 over 10 years. So 60,000 total.
So that would just be, so that would be the pre-funding of the OPEB liability, but not the benefits cost, because the health insurance benefit cost is a shared service. So I understand the number.
Correct. That's covered from an indirect. It's an indirect cost, not out of the operating budget for any department.
Okay, so it's a separate and distinct pool of. So additional funds will have to be allocated that aren't reflected in the school budget that has to cover the health insurance for new employees.
Right, and it also is dependent on annual percentage increases to healthcare costs as well. Yep.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so this is just the basic. We currently have 52.9, almost $53 million as our operating budget. Cost of level services would be 1.3 to $4 million. So the recommended superintendent budget for FY22 is 54.3 million, which is 2.5%.
Sorry, one more question about the healthcare costs for the employees. When you budgeted or have an estimated 1 million for the COVID recovery services, that does not include any kind of new full-time employees, I assume, right? Where they would have associated healthcare costs and what have you. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, not out of the operating budget.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and those would be, you know, any of those would typically be a 1-year position.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And so just to connect the two, first of all, thank you very much for that presentation. I think that was incredibly helpful to everyone to kind of see, how this process is evolving a bit in terms of, working to get to, the school portion of facilities master plan too. Do you want to talk a little bit about the funding, like the appropriation from free cash, or how that ties in? I mean, Melissa talked about it a little bit, but the last slide kind of said, okay, level services this much money at 2.5%. So what would be, like, is that still your proposed function? That's exactly what you guys want as well, or the school committee? Helen, I don't know if you could speak to that a bit.
What I can speak to is that we've had one meeting, which was our initial read. We
Okay.
had had the budget for only a few hours for us to look at individually. We have our meeting this week where we'll have some significant deliberatory time, as well as we'll have the public hearing this week. So we'll be able to take their, the thoughts of the community into consideration. So I don't feel that I can say the school committee is 100% on board with this or has other thoughts in mind. I can say that the budget directives were pretty clear. So we'll need to continue to have our conversations. I think that's just where we are in the process. By doing this so early in our process, I really can't speak to where the mind of the committee is right now. We really need to come together and have our deliberations.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, in terms of the presentation that I put forward and the team put forward as the superintendent's recommended budget on the 14th of January. That is us looking at this, coming in at level services this year, and building a long-term plan here in North Andover to change the trajectory of funding and education, so that every year it's not this battle over a percentage here, percentage there. I mean, we need to create some facilities, and if we're serious about change, I think we need a long-term plan that folks are going to buy into. And back to the question on the one-time money, there are going to be needs associated with the COVID recovery, and how we tackle that will depend on the mid-year data, how kids are doing in the spring, and then what are those needs, how are we going to best service the kids and get them caught up, get them ahead, and get them well academically and socially and emotionally as well.
Thank you. And so one question just on top of that, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the committee members, was you had mentioned the student assessments on slide 10. When do you think that the data from those types of assessments will provide you with some guidance on what may be needed for the summer, fall?
So Sasha, this is nothing new for us. I mean, we have been doing assessments for years, formative and summative assessments. And what they do is they provide us information about where kids are at, and then we have to prescribe interventions or programming. Then we have to progress monitor and see how they're doing. It's a lot like what a doctor does. He sees a patient, they tell them what's wrong, they prescribe an intervention or medication, and they progress monitor it, and then they make judgments to move forward. So at this time, we'll see where kids are at. We know what some of the trends are from the fall coming in. We have, for example, at the younger grades, we have mid-year data coming in. We have common assessments across all of our secondary levels. So this is an ongoing process throughout the course of the year. And, we will have to bring in programming to best meet those needs. So whether it's reading interventionists, it's social emotional needs that we have to bring a social worker in for to meet those needs, or maybe we want to use all the available space possible to lower class size and tackle some of the challenges with literacy that way, on the progress that we continue to make.
Okay, thank you. Donovan, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have a few, and they're a little all over the place. So Dr. Mealy and Dr. Gilligan, my apologies. So just to circle back, and it's sort of piggyback on what Sasha just asked, the recovery service is obviously the largest bucket of the COVID-related expenses. And I just want to be clear, I'm 99.9% sure I understood what you were saying, but just on the off chance I didn't. So the $1 million that you're asking for that you're requesting is to study, is for the study, the analyzation and the operationalization of the study, and data collection? Does that make sense?
So the $1 million, Donovan, will go to staffing. So based on where kids are at, what their needs are, how we will best tackle that problem, $1 million is that represents our best thinking at this time. It could be more, it could be less.
Right.
You know, I think one of the things that Dr. Mealy did a really good job looking around, because not a lot of districts came out with what they projected, even in just a chart of what that COVID expenses may be for next year. You know, they're facing cuts in many communities. I don't think they've even thought about what this may be, of what it may be. But that may change. You have to realize that depending on where we are with the virus, could impact, you know, the COVID-related money that we need to operate. So I think we're in good shape. We think that that was reasonable, what we've put in at this time, and it will be ongoing, and we'll continue to monitor it. But we feel like we have a really strong plan moving forward, and also a contingency plan for the COVID-related expenses.
Okay, good. Thank you. So at one point you indicated on one of the slides to maintain class sizes to meet our guidelines, so to keep the class size at 28. So understanding, obviously, we all know that we have space constraints, but I'm just curious, in a perfect world, what would you want our class sizes to be?
Well, you know, class size has been very high typically at our middle school. It's a little lower than our comparables at the high school. But
Just so you know where I'm coming from, I have one kid in elementary, one kid in middle, and one kid in high school. So I'm just I got the whole kit and caboodle covered, sir.
So within those guidelines, I think one of the things we've seen in North Andover, and this year is a little different because we had, you know, basically the size of almost one elementary school go into the online academy. But what we've seen, you know, what we have seen is we've been able to reduce class size at the elementary level significantly. I think it was about 5 years ago, about 60% of our classes were over the recommended guidelines. And up until pre-COVID, we got down to about 14%.
Which is what? Give me, what's that number?
They're in the budget directives for K2, the class recommended class size is 18 to 22. For grades 3 to 5, the recommended class size is 23 to 25. And for the secondary level, is classes to meet programming and needs. So for example, at the high school, you know, you want to have the marching band, you want to have 100 kids, you want to have 150 kids. So you don't want to have an average class size when you're talking about, you know, those classes.
Understood. But what you just gave me, Chairwoman Picard, is what I was looking for.
Yeah, it's in the budget presentation, so you can find it there, you know, if you want to look later.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely will. I didn't realize it was in there. My apologies. I appreciate it.
We can't possibly capture all the information that comes to
No,
us.
no, for sure.
So
And Donovan, one of the goals of the subcommittee is to revisit those numbers and see if they're still pertinent and applicable, and see if they need to be adjusted, and make that recommendation as part of its overall recommendation.
Yep. No, I appreciate that, and I greatly appreciate the work you guys are doing. It's just anecdotally what I see in my house doesn't seem to jive, but that's neither here nor there, and that's fine. And that's it. That's all I had. Thank you. I appreciate your indulgence.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I think that Town Manager Rodriguez had a comment. Oh, the hand was up. I didn't know if it was.
Thomas,
No, I'm good. Thomas' hands up.
Actually, I didn't realize the town manager was still here. Can I just ask one other question, Sasha? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Well, Melissa, going back to what you said about using the free money as, you know, to cover one-time expenses, and given what I think is a very good point made by Jim and Greg, is that we could have ongoing COVID expenses in the schools for a while. If they came back to us and said, we need another 2.6 million for COVID-related expenses next fiscal year, I'm curious, what would be your inclination? Would that be to use free money again?
It would,
Yeah, okay.
I wouldn't want to build something like that into the budget. You know, I continue, right. I continue to anticipate that, you know, next year, it could take a couple of years for us to get the kids back on track and bridge that education gap. You know, we all see it at home, right? So I think that, you know, it's not something that we'll be doing forever, thank God. So I think a one-time revenue to us is sufficient and appropriate.
So 2-time revenue.
It'll be a 2-time. That's
No,
all.
I know, I'm just giving you a hard time. But listen, before I will shut up, I promise. I just want to say thank you, Dr. Gilligan, Town Manager Rodriguez, Dr. Mealy. I think you guys working together to address that. It is going to be a big problem. I think it's going to be a bigger problem, a big problem that will continue. So I appreciate that you're all three of you are, and Chairwoman Picard are committed to working together to address that. I think it's a big help.
We are. We're very lucky. We have a good team.
Yeah, I would second that sentiment. I think that we've seen that work really well last year and hopefully this year during this budget process as well. So thank you. Thomas, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I had a comment and you guys took it already away from me. Also, I think I want to add a positive comment. Since I was now 7 years on a finance committee, and the first couple of years, we always were wondering, could we get a longer term plan for the school committee? And now finally we have it. COVID-19 came, unexpected, so the plan, had to be adjusted. And I guess that's the main reason why it goes from 5 to a 7-year plan now. What's the reason to go from 5 to 7?
Yeah, Tom, it's the pandemic, and it's trying to match it up to Facilities Master Plan Phase 2 and those 4 projects, because if everything goes to plan, the 4th project comes online in that 7th year.
And I think I think this is perfect planning. That's what we want to see. That it's it meshes. It's not just let's throw something and go ahead and then we forget the other part. I like it, and I think we came a long way. And it's I just want to congratulate you guys to be able to work on that and adjust, and we're patient and watch you. And one thing I would say, the recovery. I saw this for the first time a couple of days, and to be honest, while I have 2 kids at school, and I see that it was a lost year for them, despite all the great effort of the schools. I can only applaud what the teachers did since September, but still, we know, it's a different environment, and I think this is where we should really use our resources to get our kids back on track. And if it's more than 2.6 million, which I probably would imagine it is, I think that's a good choice of using our funds, because that's one of the things we will probably see the impact of that, in a few years, and then it's too late if we miss that opportunity to correct that. I've never really thought about it. I always COVID-19. I think about PPE, but yeah, the whole mental and the development really had a big impact, and I think it's great if we can do something to catch up for our kids. I don't even know how my little one goes back to school. He loves these 2 days. I don't think he ever will go back 5 days to school, but eventually he has to, he has to get back into that learning rhythm. And I think that is disrupted for most of the kids.
Yeah, Tom, and it is everywhere, but you hit the nail on the head. I mean, one of the things I think is a misnomer about a 5-year plan or a 6-year plan or a 7-year plan is I know this much as a former assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and now superintendent, that our kids only get one shot at the grade that they're in. Like, that's their year. So, you see some districts and the principal will say, well, we're going to turn it around in 3 for 5 years from now. And, but I say, well, what about the kids who are here now? And we take that to heart. We are going to do everything we can to best serve the kids in front of us now and for the long term. And I think that's the balance that we try to juggle. But we know we want to tackle here and now. We're not putting off that. So.
Thank you. Jen, do you have a question or comment?
I do, thank you. And I just want to echo the comments that Tom just made and thank everybody, first of all, for your presentation and all of the information. It's very helpful. And I also really appreciate seeing a long-term plan. My comments and questions relate more to the idea of recovery and the COVID-related expenses. And Dr. Gilligan, you and I have spoken before offline. It's no surprise or to anyone that I have children at both the elementary level and the middle school level. Excuse me. And one of my concerns really is what are we doing budget-wise this year and next year about the recovery for those kids who are in the really vulnerable population of being the youngest students who don't have the reading, the writing, fundamental skills, and who really aren't capable of sitting at a computer all day on these asynchronous days. And is there a plan built into the budget to leverage some of this additional staffing, all of the additional resources we've already poured into the schools in the real near term, this calendar year, into the fall, over the summer? What are we doing to address those issues? What resources are we putting to kids like those who, you know, are in second grade and can't read yet because they missed half of first grade, and now they're getting a quarter of the education in second grade? Things like that. Like, what is the immediate plan, and do you have the resources, and are you getting the resources you need? Because to me, these vulnerable populations, the high risk needs, the younger kids, these are the ones that we should be, as a town, committed to giving our resources to getting back on track and helping. And I'm just curious because I don't hear, and maybe that's because it's a school committee thing, but I'm not hearing the specific targeted plan right now. How do we start recovering? What's the next steps? And do you have the resources you need?
So one of the things I think you'll probably hear in the next school committee and a couple after is some of the things that we're looking at this year. You know, with, you know, Miss Marks, our assistant superintendent for teaching and learning, you know, running something over April break for, you know, an acceleration academy, talking about what type of summer programming we can offer over the summer for kids to get caught up. And then also, you know, in terms of the recovery, how, you know, the progress kids make this year, you know, how are we going to then support and staff for next year around getting that back? Because I think there's nothing more important than getting kids back into school full time, all the time, every day. And that's our goal. And I think it's a challenge right now. I think that's what everyone wishes that we could do. And, you know, when you look locally, it's been a challenge locally, right? You know, Methuen was just back this week for the first time since pre-Thanksgiving, you know, and same with some other districts. But, you know, so in terms of offerings, we're looking at something for April vacation. We're looking at something for programming over the summer that we'll do school-wide, and probably also with Rick Gallant. And then staffing for next year, I think we talked about tonight. But then more importantly, you know, I think you'll hear more from us about, you know, prioritizing, trying to get students back this year, what that might look like, particularly with the younger grades. You know, I think one of the things today I just learned from Melissa that was slightly disappointing is we were anticipating getting all educators vaccinated in mid-February. Wrote a letter to the governor yesterday, along with 15 local superintendents and union leadership across the Merrimack Valley, urging him to have educators classified, moved up in the classification. I think that's critical. So I think all these complex factors play a role into what the spring will look like. And certainly, you know, we want a full return for the fall. But I also would say for the fall, the one thing that there's always a silver lining in some way, I think, in the sense of, I think there's going to be a lot of good things that we learn from this. It may not seem it now, and there are challenges now, and I know that. I'm back in the office, for example, tonight. I was trying to do this at home, and my wife said, "Why don't you stay home tonight and do this here?" And then I said, "I'll do it at the kitchen table." "No, you can't do it here." "I'll do it here." You know, with the kids doing their thing at night and classes and all, and her, and, you know, so the challenge. But I think that, you know, I think that North Andover, I never thought would have equity and access to get every single kid in this district a Chromebook, right? That a few years back, we couldn't cobble together enough Chromebooks, you know, for schools across our elementary to have classes use. You know, I know that we had some challenges with technology early on, but like I really wanted us to upgrade that infrastructure. I worked with Melissa to get that in. You know, they were booked up for months trying to get that in, and thank God we did. We saw this fall that our dedicated line on the town side and school side, you know, it literally blew up. So we were very thankful to have that. So I think there'll be good things that come out of it. But certainly in the short term, we have to look at the rest of this year. What are we going to offer? What are our plans? And how does that play in with the vaccine and our priorities of kids? And then how are we going to best use staff? And particularly if we have one-time money to best meet the needs of kids.
And so following up on that, and thank you, that's a really helpful answer. But I look at the COVID-related expenses sheet in your presentation on page 8. And for example, there was other staffing costs this year of $614,000. And for next year, you're projecting $200,000. And then there was the cost of OLA, which you've cut in half for next year. But if you have, I guess I'm just wondering, like, if there are all of these additional staff members that were hired this year to help supplement the schools, are you planning to use some of that money to sort of transition them to help the kids on the recovery? Like, are those people going to be utilized? Are you, is $200,000 of additional staff in your budget for the upcoming year really going to be enough to get all of those kids that are so far behind back on track? Like, is this realistic to do what we want to do as a district for moving the kids forward?
Well,
So can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
So as far as trying to project for next year, the OLA and the other costs, those are being covered by the CARES Act money this year and the money that Melissa identified as additional funding we might have to come up with. So it's not like that money's going to be available. It's only going to be available because we're setting aside the 2.6 million to cover them. What we're anticipating is that we're hopeful, I guess is a better word, that we don't need to provide OLA next year because we have everybody back. And those other employee costs are mostly extra hours, like delivering meals, custodial overtime, TAs doing extra hours. So that's mostly extra hours. But what we're hopeful of is that we're going to be able to move some of that money to provide more recovery services. So that's what you're looking at when you look at that sheet.
Thank you. That's actually really helpful to understand.
Thank you. Chris, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback a little bit about what Jen was talking about. It's really great to hear about looking forward to the recovery, implementing programs that we might do over the vacation, over the summer, because it seems to me that some sort of an academy over the summertime is just going to be essential for all students. And it would be really wonderful if we could see something like that available to any parent, really any child who, you know, is in need, or any parent that says like, hey, my kid, they just didn't get this. And to that end, I mean, again, pipe dreams, but maybe not. I mean, it seems like we might have, through Melissa's good graces here, some funding to do that. So I hope that that's a realistic goal. But to that end, this seems like an enormous task for the schools to identify all of these needs, because it's not just you know, the high need students. It's really every student. There's something that everybody missed somewhere along the lines. And how do you figure out, well, what is the most prevalent issues for each kid, or for each classroom, or for each grade? You know, this grade, man, they just lost this chunk of math because whatever, there was the time the computers were down, or however you evaluate. And so what I'm getting at is, it seems overwhelming to the school system right now to make those sorts of evaluation. And the ask is, do you need additional resources to even make those evaluations? Do you need, should there be someone within the school department who that is their only focus? As in, do they need to be taken from part-time to full-time? Do you need resources to hire someone, to a consultant? I mean, Sasha and I had some conversations about, you know, about her kids going to school. What would you do, or what would you think about this? Maybe a consultant to specifically focus on what are the needs of the kids, what are the programs that could be put together to benefit the kids. I mean, just a way to direct the cost in that. Is there anything the schools need to actually accomplish this goal? What else do you need?
Chris, so that's a great question. I think one of the things we're really good at is figuring out where kids are at and what they need. But
Yeah.
we're certainly open. I mean, this has never been done in the history of the world before. This is new to everybody. So we're pretty collaborative with a lot of other districts, not only from this region but across Eastern Mass and even a little bit towards Western Mass. So we'd be open to that idea, where kids are at. In terms of our assessments. So we're open to that. And then I think the other part you mentioned that's really critical is, that's when we talk about standards. So what's essential? What do kids need? What do they need to know and be able to do? What are those power standards that are non-negotiable that you got to learn at each level? As the foundational blocks moving forward. And it's kind of like a target, right? So what's essential and what's nice to know? And then if you have additional time, and I think that's critical. So, it's a good question. It's something that we've talked about, and I probably want to have my team back with Lorene Marks and our humanities director, as well as our STEM coordinator across the district. And our humanities director is also an EL expert, and she runs our EL program. So Helen.
I mean,
Can I just step in for a second?
Sure.
And say, for one thing, having had many conversations with Lorene Marks and others, we're not waiting until next year to address deficits in learning or incomplete learning right now. The teachers, as soon as kids come into the classroom, start assessing what they know and what they're able to do and where they may need specific instruction right now. And that started in September, as soon as kids came back in the door. So that if there was somebody who had been slipping behind, for example, in reading, they set up specific interventions so that you could nip that in the bud right in September. And so, as they have their mid-year assessments, they can see if those interventions have already been successful. So the sooner we can intervene with kids, the better we are. It doesn't always require additional people. It might require additional time. It might require additional attention. So I don't want anyone to think that we're just going to wait until the end of this school year and then figure out where people have fallen behind. That's continuously happening. And I feel that we're really getting into some of the meat of school committee work. So folks that are interested in what's happening at the secondary level and where those standards are. We had a presentation at school committee in December from the principal of the middle school and the principal of the high school. So that information is available. And then we will be having an upcoming presentation on the elementary school level, probably in February, so that they'll have the beginning of the year and the midterm information, which they can report on growth and where they're seeing that there's red flags for the next steps in this planning. So it really is a little ahead of the game to be planning what exact interventions are, because it's going to depend on the individual students and the specific needs that we have as we move forward. And we see the successes of the interventions we've already had this year. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Helen. I appreciate it.
Add one thing to that, and it's such a good point, Helen. And the reason I discuss it is because I think that I speak for a lot of the members of the committee is like, there's nothing that we want more than to be able to support the school department in their endeavor to try to make things whole for as many people as possible. And so it's like bringing up things like, you might be able to say like, oh, we have to say we need another person to do this. We want to hear these things. What do you need? Do you need another body? Do you need another 2 bodies? Do you need to have, research done? Do you need to have a building space? Do you need to be coordinate with the youth center? I mean, what needs to happen? So the more information that you give us about the needs that you have, the better able that we are going to be able to help you and hopefully help the community as a whole. So that's basically it.
I think too, Chris, that, every time we have these presentations, someone on the school committee asks, what do you need? If you need anything, you need to let us know, because our job is to advocate for the funds that you need. So I appreciate you asking that. It really gives us more power and more authority to continue to ask those questions, because if there wasn't support, there'd be no reason to ask the questions, right? Do you need anything? Yeah, well, we can't help you. That's not good. So it feels really good to come in and have you asking the same questions that we're asking. So thank you so much.
Chris,
Okay,
we,
onward.
Chris, we appreciate it. I mean, I think a lot of districts and places they'll say, well, what do you need? And they'll say, oh, we've got to do X, Y, or Z. I think it's important for us to say, what do we need? And then what do we expect to get from these needs? What is our goal? Where do we want to get to? What do we expect as an outcome? And I think that's the change, here in North Andover over the last several years is, that's really why we have a strategic plan. That's why we have a longer term plan. These are the needs, and how do we best meet those needs? And what is going to be the outcome? Dr.
Thank
Neal, were you going to say something? I didn't mean to cut you off, Jim.
I didn't make a move to say anything.
Oh, maybe I don't know, the Sasha up there.
No, thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. And I'll kind of tie it all together is that, we are all here, I think, with a common goal, which is to try to make our community the best that it can be. And so by, working the select board and the school committee as policymakers, and the finance committee is hopefully looking at the financial position of our community and how that all comes together, and kind of all of the administrative collaborative effort. That's a really big, I think, stride, and something that we're all working towards, because ultimately it's going to benefit our community, and at this point our kids. So that's, I think, where a lot of our questions come from, and we appreciate looking at this from a creative funding source perspective, and hope that we are available once this budget is, you have your ability for the public to comment, and then you finalize your recommendation, and there's a school committee recommended budget that potentially, Dr. Gilligan and Dr. Melian, Chairwoman Picard can come back and say, hey, this is where we ended up, and hopefully at that point we're headed, towards a consensus budget, because we've worked hard to get there throughout this process.
Well said. We all have the same goal. We all want what's best. Sometimes people want to go a different speed or take a different road. But in the end, we want what's best for the students in North Andover and our kids in this community. And last but not least, for those who don't know that may be watching, if there's anyone watching, the 14th is the next school committee meeting. Excuse me, the 28th, which is Thursday. I'm sorry, the 14th was the first one. There's a public hearing section. There's an agenda posted if you want to participate in the public hearing, and the school committee will take input and have some deliberations. And ultimately, the school committee will vote on a budget February 4th to move forward. So thank you for the time tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you all. We really appreciate it. The finance committee has a little bit more to do, but if everyone else wants to drop off so you can spend your evening in a different way, we appreciate your time, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, guys. Appreciate
Good
it.
night.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move forward to old business. Is there any old business that anyone would like to discuss? No. Hearing none, let's move forward to approve the prior meeting minutes, please. We have two sets of minutes to approve, one from November 9th and one from December 14th, because we did not approve those prior minutes at the tri-board meeting. If you guys would take a second to please review these, then I'll take a motion.
It's Regina
Sasha,
Keen.
Go ahead, Regina.
I was going to say I move approval of the meeting minutes from our meeting on November 9th and December 14th.
I will second that. Donovan O'Connell.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I will do a roll call just because we're virtual. Regina Keen,
Oh, aye.
Thomas Ringler,
Aye.
Chris Allen,
Aye.
Donovan O'Connell,
Aye.
Jen Luz,
Aye.
Dustin Silk. Dustin, wait, I didn't hear you.
Saw his lips move.
Ed McMillan.
Aye.
All right. Hearing no opposition, the minutes are from November 9th and December 14th are approved. And there is nothing else on the agenda unless anyone has any other business. I will take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
This is Denvin O'Connell, and I would move that we adjourn.
All
Uh,
those in favor?
Chris, got a second?
Second? I see, I was getting ahead of myself. It's past 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris Allen, for the second. All those in favor? I will take a roll call. Regina Keen,
Aye.
Thomas Ringler. Gave me a thumbs up and an eye. Chris Allen,
Aye.
Jennifer O'Connell,
Aye.
Jennifer Les,
Aye.
Justin Silk. I gave an eye and a thumbs up. Ed McMillan.
Aye.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.